My mom showed me that the way we listen either deepens invisible wounds or it helps heal them. I didn't have words for it as a kid, but I knew that I had a job. Sit with her at our kitchen table, listen, and notice a kind of pain that no one else seemed to see. It was a heavy responsibility. I can assure you that my therapist and I are still unpacking that. But it also became my greatest gift, to notice what's hidden beneath the surface. And for 3 decades, I've been helping individuals, families, educators, and business leaders close what I call the listening gap by learning to shine a light on the story beneath the surface, on purpose, and in every conversation. I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania, Chocolate Town, yoo-hoo! Yeah, Hershey! Chocolate Town, USA. Just 10 minutes from Hershey Park. My childhood, it was filled with friends and sports. It all looked ideal until you listened just a little more closely. My mom suffered from severe depression and anxiety. Now, she was warm and funny. She lit up every room. But beneath her surface, she lived with lifelong pain from being motherless. Doctors had warned my grandmother not to have children because of her fragile heart, but she did it anyway. And within just 3 months of giving birth, she died. So my mom grew up believing that her very existence cost her a mom. Can you imagine carrying that story into every room that you enter? As a little girl, I'd hover nearby when my mom talked to friends, sometimes even strangers, trying to explain what it was like to grow up without a mom. But as soon as she opened up, people would rush in with all this positivity. Look at all the wonderful things in your life. But with each well-intentioned comment, I watched her pain get worse. When was the last time you tried to share something that you were struggling with and someone rushed in with advice or a silver lining? That instinct that we have to rush in, to fix, or to cheer someone up, that's where the listening gap opens. The listening gap, it's the distance between the story someone is living and the story we actually hear and understand. And I watched that gap play out over and over again, people reacting to the picture they could see on the surface, but missing the story underneath that was crying out to be understood. I was 8 years old the first time somebody asked, "Christine, what do you want to be when you grow up?" "I want to be a psychologist." So it turns out that some of us go into the field of psychology to fix our own childhood dysfunction, you can imagine. That's exactly what I did. I didn't know it then, but sitting at the kitchen table with my mom, that was the beginning of my life's work. Now, I thought the universe had taught me enough listening lessons for one lifetime, but apparently it had more to teach me. I'm 28, on my way to work, when a driver passed out at the wheel hit me head on. And for 3 years, I lived with chronic pain that went unexplained. And then at 31, just 6 months after trying out for the United States field hockey team, I was at a routine doctor's appointment, and when I stood up, my body broke. In an instant, I went from healthy athlete to a patient whose life revolved around pain. Here's a photo of me after my 3rd spinal surgery. But most of the time I looked fine. In fact, friends told me I looked great. It was then that I realized I was living a version of my mother's story. Her pain was psychological, mine was physical, but both invisible to everyone else. When people hear I had a life-altering injury, the first question they ask me is, "But you're good now, right?" Their intention is kind, but it does show how quickly we want to rush past the deeper story. We want to hear how that story ends before we've ever listened to how it began. That car accident, it irrevocably changed my body. But it also did something unexpected. It set me on a mission, because I finally put language around a problem that I had been watching my entire life. Why we have a gap between what is said and what is understood. Okay, raise your hand if you've ever been told to listen better. All right, hold on. Now keep it up if you've ever been taught how. And there's our first problem. We are told to listen, but fewer than 2% of us have ever formally been taught how. And I'm the perfect example. I got a master's in psychology, I became a systems family therapist, and still had no formal listening training. And here's our second problem. We really only have one known methodology for good listening, active listening. But that was developed back in the 1950s for therapy. It's brilliant, but so complicated that we've turned it into a checklist that we perform. We nod, we make eye contact, we maybe put our phones away. But inside, we're already fixing, defending, or moving on. We're not failing because we don't care. We are failing because no one's taught us a simple way to listen. And I thought, it just doesn't have to be this way. What if everybody could learn what I learned when I was little? How to shine a light and notice what's hidden beneath the surface. How differently would we show up for each other in our relationships at home and at school and our workplaces? So I've spent the past decade building a simple path to better understanding that starts with just 2 tools to help you close your listening gap. The first tool brings the story beneath the surface into the light. It's really easy to get lost when you're trying to understand someone, which is why I created the compass, to keep you oriented towards what matters most, the story beneath the surface. Now, I built the compass on just 5 questions that professional listeners, like journalists, therapists, and negotiators use. And they are, can you take me back to the beginning? What happened next? How did that make you feel? Can you tell me more? And it sounds like you felt. Now, these questions, they're not new. What makes the compass different is the discipline of asking only these 5. Active listening tells us to ask really good questions, but figuring out which questions to ask, it's complicated. And the very questions that we think are helping us are actually getting us lost. By asking only these 5, you're guaranteed to keep pointed towards what matters most, the story beneath the surface. I've tested the compass thousands and thousands of times with students to business leaders across cultures and across contexts, and again, when people stick to asking just these 5, the real story underneath comes out. But a compass alone, it's not enough. Here's the biggest mistake we make when we're listening. We think we're done listening when the story ends, but that's when actual understanding begins. Which leads us to the second tool, showing what you understand. Now, here's how most of us show understanding. We use 2 words. I understand. But saying the words I understand doesn't mean that someone feels understood. Think about the last time somebody told you I understand. How did that make you feel? Active listening tells us to mirror back a word or a sentence. But a mirror, that only reflects the surface. To close our gap, we need to shine a light on the story underneath, which is why I created the flashlight. It's the antidote to stopping at the surface. Instead of just a word or a sentence, you summarize the whole story back, from how it began to how it ends, and that's how the other person can see what you understand. And that is when we start to close our gap. So before you leave to go back to your own conversations, let me leave you with this. A few years ago, I was conducting a workshop in Chicago, and I asked everybody to go home and use their compass and flashlight, as I ask you to do tonight. The next day, a participant named Jeffrey came in and shared that he had called his 11-year-old nephew and simply asked, "Hey man, how was your day?" His nephew responded, "Not good, Uncle Jeff, not good." But instead of Jeffrey trying to cheer his nephew up, he reached for his compass and he simply asked, "Could you tell me more?" "Well, I didn't get the basketball shoes I wanted." So Jeffrey continued, "Can you take me back to the beginning? And, well, how did that make you feel?" "Well, my dad, he promised me the shoes, but with my parents' divorce." And then Jeffrey turned on his flashlight. And he said, "Man, you really wanted those basketball shoes, didn't you? Your dad promised them to you, but with your parents' divorce, he's been breaking a lot of promises. And now you're wondering if you matter to him at all." "Yeah, that's it, Uncle Jeffrey." People were still in tears. And Jeffrey looked at me and said, "Christine, I'm mad at you." Confused, I thought this actually went pretty well. I simply asked, "Can you tell me more?" He said, "Well, this homework assignment cost me $150. I promised my nephew I'd buy him the shoes." People were chuckling. And then Jeffrey said something else that made everyone in the room rethink what it really means to listen. He said, "I realized something. I realized that no matter who you're talking with, whether it's your customer or your employee or your nephew, no matter who you're talking with, it is never about the shoes." Thank you.